Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight. Hugs and smiles at the Kremlin. On one side, Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator wanted for war crimes. On the other side, the leader of a European nation and NATO country. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico spoke to the Russian president about the economy and finances. More on that in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at the latest headlines. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Poland is the country that will pave Ukraine's way to the European Union next year. Tens of thousands of people gathered in the center of Belgrade to protest against the government. Santa Claus left Lapland today for his most important journey. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico's visit to Moscow has drawn much criticism, not just from abroad, but also at home, where it has caused tensions within his coalitions and sparked protests from civil society. Meanwhile, Slovakia's actual energy problem remains unsolved, reported by Michiel van Blumstein.
While Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico has never made a secret of wanting to visit Moscow, Sunday's trip came as a surprise to most. It didn't take long for criticism to come in.
This is indeed a big security issue, both for Slovakia and the entire Europe. Why is this leader so dependent on Moscow? What is being paid to him, and what does he pay with?
At home, there were protests in front of the main government building. Many Slovaks are not thrilled with what they see as kowtowing to the Kremlin.
He has served the purpose of Russian propaganda, where President Putin siding, with or showing up together with Prime Minister Fico can say, now I'm not alone, because there are countries like Slovakia, like Hungary, who are not supporting Ukraine, and the West is divided.
Criticism doesn't only come from the opposition, but also from Fico's coalition partner. While President Peter Pellegrini has been cautious in directly criticizing Fico's visit, his party colleagues have been more vocal.
There are some MPs in this party who are growingly critical towards some of the government's actions, and some of them have voiced critiques already vis-à-vis this visit. So there we have perhaps growing tension, an indicator of a growing tension also within the coalition.
But Fico claims the country's energy security is at stake. Slovakia is even more dependent on Russian gas coming through Ukraine than other countries in the region. The only supply comes through a single pipeline originating in Russia, which travels through Ukraine. Other countries are at least looking for alternatives. Even famously Kremlin-friendly governments like Serbia and Hungary are looking to be connected to the southern gas corridor, which brings LNG from Azerbaijan. Serbia completed an interconnection with Bulgaria last year, but Slovakia has taken no steps to diversify their energy mix.
Many points show us that Slovakia has neglected the decisions to do the political, economical, and technological decisions to be able to drop the dependence. And now, basically 10 days before the contract with Gazprom runs out, Slovakia, and at the level of the Prime Minister, is trying to secure cheap gas.
But the visit is unlikely to bring such results, as it's Ukraine that makes transit decisions. Rather, political scientist Max Steuer believes that Fico is mostly driven by political symbolism in the face of likely energy price hikes next year.
And so with this, Fico can communicate that to his voters, to his supporters, that he is doing something. He is not sitting idly.
Slovakia won't run out of gas entirely, as it can always look toward the west. But it will certainly be much more expensive than what Bratislava is used to.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy said he is counting on the upcoming Polish presidency in the Council of the EU when it comes to Ukraine's EU accession path. Despite reports that Poland could slow down trade talks with Kyiv because of internal matters, the scenario of Warsaw negatively impacting Kyiv's EU bid are unlikely, experts say. Marek Steele has more.
Kyiv expects 2025 to be crucial regarding its integration with the European Union.
Next year, we must do our utmost to advance our negotiations and develop relations with our partners in the European Union. This is why the presidency of Poland, and in the second half of the year, of Denmark in the EU, should be historic for Ukraine.
Politico reported last week that Poland could slow-walk Ukraine trade talks until next year's election.
Voters grow increasingly wary of the war in Ukraine, and farmers protest loudly that cheaper agri-food imports from Poland's eastern neighbor are ruining them.
Speaking to TVP World off the record, a Polish official rejected these claims. Poland is on Kyiv's side when it comes to supporting its EU and NATO memberships, the Polish Prime Minister reaffirmed in Lviv last week.
Ukraine has always been able to count on Polish support when it comes to NATO membership. Nothing has changed in this regard. If it were up to Poland, it wouldn't take more than one day.
When it comes to the Polish EU presidency, not only President Zelenskyy is hopeful.
I believe that we will start our negotiations, accession talks, in terms of several clusters that had been already announced by the President Zelenskyy as well. So I hope that Polish counterparts as well as Polish diplomats will help Ukraine.
The EU requires candidate countries to implement complex reforms which can be divided into clusters, such as EU fundamentals, the internal market, or competitiveness.
I'm certain that at one point Ukraine will join the EU. On NATO, I think it's a very different question, and I think right now we should focus mostly on EU membership, because there's actually a technical progress that is possible.
Even though progress could be accelerated with the support of its neighbors during the upcoming Polish and Danish presidencies, Ukraine has a long road before it's accepted into the Union.
Satellite images show that North Korea is increasing the flow of weapons to Russia, the Wall Street Journal reports. More than 3,000 North Korean soldiers have been killed or wounded while taking part in the war against Ukraine on Russia's side, according to the Ukrainian government. We're now moving live to Kyiv, where our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is located. Good evening, Oz. So does the presence of thousands of North Korean soldiers change the situation on the front?
Well, that's difficult to tell exactly. The situation on the front for Ukraine has not been going well throughout 2024, except for the small incursion into Kursk that they managed to gain a foothold inside Russia. They had some success there in 2024. Of course, this is where the North Koreans have been deployed. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in a statement released today, said that there were as many as 3,000 wounded or killed North Koreans in the battles around Kursk to date. Now, this figure is much larger than any other estimate that has been given before. That should be noted. Obviously, this is of great concern to Kyiv. And speaking in this statement, Zelenskyy said there are risks of North Korea sending additional soldiers and military equipment to the Russian army, and we will have tangible responses to this. Obviously, these reports that satellite imagery are showing that North Korea is planning to expand its deployment inside the Russian Federation to combat Ukrainian troops. This is obviously going to be of some concern to Kyiv, but of more concern than the troops is the amount of equipment and ammunition that's being sent, with some reports now suggesting that Russia is heavily reliant on North Korean ammunition, and that a significant proportion of Russia's artillery use is coming from North Korean stocks. So this is going to be of major concern to the Ukrainians. They'll be hoping that their European and American partners will be able to ramp up the kind of ammunition production needed to combat the kind of industrial capacity that North Korea is being able to output and provide towards Russia.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Chatterjee coming to us live from Kyiv. As Russian forces claim to have taken 2 more villages in the Donbass on Monday, inching westwards, Ukrainian forces face an uphill battle. Kyiv remains in dire need of more arms and munitions, particularly air defenses, as Russia relentlessly targets the country's energy sector. European allies, however, have been slow to fill the gaps and provide more support for Ukraine. As the new year approaches, there will be questions if Europe can deliver and lead. Sasha Farbach reports.
As the harsh winter bites, Ukraine's front line is slowly shifting as Putin throws everything he can at Ukraine in a desperate attempt to make gains before any potential negotiations. At a recent gathering of the EU's leaders, European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen made it clear that 2025 would be a decisive year for Ukraine.
Putin is redoubling efforts to make gains, so bolstering Ukraine right now is both a moral and a strategic imperative for us. The world is watching how we sustain our support to Ukraine, and just like the brave Ukrainian resistance, we will be steadfast.
The traditional European transatlantic relationship faces uncertainty, and allies remain concerned that Donald Trump may leave Europeans forced to take security into their own hands. Furthermore, traditional heavyweights like Germany and France are weakened at home due to internal political shifts, raising the question of who will lead in Europe. Amidst a defense shortfall across the continent, Europe's defense sector remains fragmented and slow to adapt.
Poland and other countries increased spending on defense after Russia's invasion on Ukraine, but 80% of that has been to purchase American arms, because there is not enough supplies of European arms. The European defense industry is not in such a great shape. So the idea now is, rely on the transatlantic alliance on the one hand, but invest more in European defense, and that means European armament companies.
Europe must do more, and much of that is not just a challenge of political will, but also capacity. Brussels' new Commissioner for Defense, Andrius Kubilius, is under no illusions that there's no time to lose. He's called for more funding, saying Europe's defense plans need a big bang, and the urgency is clear.
Defense funding possibilities before next MFF will come, because next MFF will come only in 2028. It's too late. Now, if we are talking about Russian possibilities to be prepared for military aggression in 2030 or earlier, then we need to find a way how we can raise defense spending earlier than next MFF.
According to the Defense Commissioner, Europe will need 500 billion euros to ramp up its defense industry over the next decade. But he also expects NATO members to increase spending to 3%, but that's only the beginning. With Russian hybrid threats increasing and political divisions within the bloc, much will need to be done, with the clock ticking and much is at stake. As Poland takes over the rotating presidency of the EU Council in January, 2025 will prove to be a decisive year indeed. Much will depend on Europe's ability to deliver and those who lead it.
Protests are taking place in Serbia as people demand accountability for last month's roof collapse that killed 15 people. The demonstrations have grown into a wider anti-government movement. Krzysztof Panek has more.
What began last month as protests over the responsibility for the accident has grown into a larger movement against the Serbian government in general. The current protests are largely attended by university students as well as faculty members.
It is the honor and responsibility of your generation, as it was for me in the latter half of the 1990s, to be the drivers of change, to drive the progress of this society, and to ensure that Serbia is a decent state for all of us.
On November 1st, a part of the railway station in the city of Novi Sad collapsed, killing 15 people. The faulty part of the construction was very old and was not replaced during the reconstruction, which ended just months before the collapse. Protesters have blamed the current administration for the accident. An investigation was launched into the matter, resulting in the arrest of a number of officials, including the construction minister. Protests began in Novi Sad, with demonstrators accusing the government of negligence. The government vowed to release all documents relating to the incident.
I resolved to provide the documentation to the public and to the students as they requested, contingent upon their authorization of a designated individual, so that we know who we are giving it to, so that we don't give it to just anyone off the street.
While protests have proceeded peacefully, demonstrators are alleging assault by people associated with the government.
I am here with the hope that the persons who beat my fellow students from the Faculty of Dramatic Arts will be identified and prosecuted under the law. Furthermore, the public broadcaster, RTS, is continuously circulating lies about us being paid by various foreign entities, which I think all citizens clearly understand is untrue.
The ruling Serbian Progressive Party has already faced large-scale protests against the construction of a lithium mine in the country. However, the current demonstrations seem to be directed against the government in general, rather than just one specific issue.
It is very, very early to predict whether this means the end of the incumbent coalition. I have learned in the past 12 years never to underestimate Alexander Vučić. But this is, I speak with full confidence, the most serious political crisis that they have faced.
Most recent available polls show parties forming the current Serbian government enjoy a comfortable lead, with 63% of the public planning to vote for them. It remains to be seen if the current protests will affect this support.
Santa Claus is not wasting any time. He's just starting his journey from Finland, but Santa's doppelgangers have already made appearances all around the world, from riding a motorbike in Barcelona to gliding through Venice canals in a gondola and even attending a meeting on security alongside EU leaders in Finland. Santa proves to be a true jet setter. Sonia Gatabishchan has more.
Hello, everybody.
Santa is officially starting his yearly journey from his hometown in Finland, Rovaniemi, to spread peace, love, and unity around the globe. Santa Claus is coming. And although his journey has only just begun, Santa's doppelgangers have already been seen almost everywhere. Santa was seen diving in Florida and later swapped his sleigh for a gondola in Venice. To further show that Santas have a flair for various modes of transportation, they were seen showing off motorcycling skills in Barcelona. Santa has made more than one appearance in Spain, as he was also seen comforting the residents of Valencia following the devastating floods.
By telling you that I've cried with emotion, I think that says it all. Children should not have to go through what they have gone through. They shouldn't. And if you ask me a lot, I'm going to get excited. But seeing this like this today, with this environment, with everything they have experienced, this is truly a gift from Santa Claus.
Santas were also seen running in Sibiu, Romania, to get in shape and leave more room for Christmas delights. And because Santa apparently can't be cut any slack, he was later seen delivering rental Christmas trees in Cluj.
Everyone honks at me in traffic. On top of that, kids are in the car windows waving, and I have to watch my brakes because I'm waving too.
And in his capacity as the world leader in delivering good cheer, Santa also attended a security meeting in Finland alongside other EU leaders, such as EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs Kaja Kallas, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Prime Ministers of Finland, Greece and Sweden. But what about Poland? Well, we did a poll and the message is clear.
Oh, come on! What is the question? How can you not wait for Santa? It's impossible.
You heard it here, Santa. Maybe ice skating in Warsaw can be next on your list.
As we're getting closer to the end of 2024, it is time to take a look at projections on how Polish economy will fare in the coming months, what to look out for, and how the internal and external factors are going to influence Polish economy, where our things are going to improve, and what are the greatest challenges. Joining me now in the studio to have this discussion is Paweł Karbownik, Polish Deputy Finance Minister. Thank you for joining. It's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the economic outlook for Poland in 2025? Next year's budget assumes that the GDP will grow and reach 3.9%, but a couple of banks recently already slashed their predictions. For example, the PKO BP, the biggest bank in Poland, went down to 3.5% when it comes to their predictions. What's the outlook?
Well, certainly growth has accelerated in Poland. Just to recall that we've inherited an economy that was not growing at all. So this year alone, we expect growth to reach around 3% of GDP, whereas next year, indeed, the projections are closer to 4%. Obviously, it's difficult to predict today whether it's going to be 3.9, 4.1 or 3.6. And as we have seen last week with economic data, positive economic data, they can also surprise on the positive side. So I wouldn't like to, make other projections than what we already have in the budget, which is like 4.9% of GDP next year, and inflation at 5%.
Inflation at 5%. So if we were to take into account the lower predictions, are you confident that Poland can actually still reduce its deficit in a 4-year frame without significant cuts to expenses?
Well, the fiscal framework and cuts in the deficits are already forecasted with the investment and GDP outlook that we have in mind, and this is also what we have discussed with the European Commission. So I wouldn't like to already go in those pessimistic scenarios, because indeed there is a huge magnitude of investments that are coming into the pipeline. Just to recall that we have historically highest investments in the budget foreseen for defense, for healthcare. Also, for the first time in history, we have designed over 4 billion Polish zlotys for the build-up of nuclear power plant. We have record investments for railways. So I think these investments will accelerate the economy. And if you are talking to the economists and to the banks, there is already a positive spillover effect from the EU funds, the RRF, what we call it. So I would say that we are rather sticking to the projections, and we shall see what comes up next year.
So you mentioned those EU funds. There is an increase, obviously, but aside from that, how are you planning to make that growth happen in Poland? There's going to be a big influx of EU funds, but what apart from the funds?
So, as I have said, we have already dedicated massive investments in the national budget. We will have massive investments from the EU funds. And obviously we are working on improving the business environment. So we're also talking to investors, also preparing some fields of economy that could be entered, like for example, innovation. We have big interests from innovative companies. So I think there is a broad spectrum of policies, and certainly some reforms of the investment framework, innovation framework in Poland. This could improve the outlook.
We're around the corner from Donald Trump being sworn into office as the 47th president of the United States. The change in the White House is definitely going. We've already seen some ripple effect after the election at the beginning of November, and there's going to be a definite impact on the European economy, which involves Polish economy. How do you think Donald Trump taking over office is going to affect Polish economy in 2025? Are we to look for any certain changes?
So maybe let me start by saying that Donald Trump loves Poland. And we've worked with him in the G7 when we were working in Brussels with Prime Minister Tusk. So we've welcomed Donald Trump during his first visit to Europe as a president. And then for a couple of years we've been cooperating with him, his administration within the G7. And whenever he was referring to Poland, he was always very optimistic and enthusiastic even, I would say. So I think, this is on the positive side. When you ask me about economic tensions, we shall see. I mean, the projections that there are from the European Commission indicate that any trade conflict would harm in the first place the US, not Europe. So I think there will be a very intense dialogue when the new administration takes office, and certainly our presidency will be part of this dialogue. We already have foreseen a discussion about it at the EU finance ministers in January. Minister Domański will chair a dinner of EU finance ministers on the 20th of January when Donald Trump takes office. So it's very timely. And we will try to see, what kind of a dialogue we could have with the American administration so that the outcome of these negotiations is positive for both sides, because we believe that, with a trade conflict, both sides could lose, and certainly it's nothing.
Most definitely, but we did hear about the possible tariffs. Do you think that there is a possibility that there would be some sort of a standoff and in terms of tariffs between Europe and the US, and how would that affect Poland?
Donald Trump is a deal maker. And already in her first call, the President of the European Commission has indicated that probably we could buy more LNG. As we know, Donald Trump will increase the production of gas in the US. So there is a scope for a conversation. Some economists indicate that the big outflows in terms of trade to the US are a result from the presence of big pharma in a few member states, which basically make great business in Europe. So I think this conversation is much more complex than just slashing tariffs.
Obviously, when we talk about Donald Trump and we're considering the situation in Europe, we cannot forget about, for example, defense spending. We also have in Europe persistent problems with balancing budgets in the EU, and there has to be more spending given to the defense. Do you think that EU fiscal rules should be discarded altogether, or perhaps modified to be able to work more collectively?
So we have a new fiscal framework in the EU which takes into account the increase of defense spending. Of course, there is a question how to interpret these new rules, and this is the conversation that we will be having during the Polish presidency, but it's already being taken care of in the regulation. So that's the first point. And secondly, obviously, as you know, Poland spends the most from all the NATO countries, and we ask our colleagues and express our sort of, I don't want to use the word demand, but sort of expectation that our European colleagues contribute significantly much more than today. And this is something that we brought up to the table already last year in December from the first Council of EU Finance Ministers. Consistently during each meeting, we've been saying that the new administration of Donald Trump is coming and that the Europeans have to spend much more. And this is the conversation we're going to have during the presidency.
I'm very happy you mentioned the presidency, because on the 1st of January, Poland is taking over the rotating EU Council presidency. When talking about defense, when talking about the spending and the economy, what do you think is going to be Poland's aim and goal towards a more unified stance when it comes to spending in Europe in face of the challenges that we have on the continent right now?
So, as I've said, we try to convince other friends that they need to spend much more, but that's not enough. We need to coordinate and we need to decide collectively what needs to be done in terms of defense building capabilities in Europe so that Europe is safe. And this is the conversation that's going to start. It's already started, but it will be reinvigorated during a leaders' summit at the beginning of February. Where the European Commission will present a paper, and we have discussed it with the Commissioner in charge of Defense, Commissioner Kubilius. Mr. Domański met him 2 weeks ago to ask him for a list of, I would say, a shopping list, if I may say so, what needs to be bought so that the Europeans are safe. And once we get this list around February, in April we'll have a discussion here in Warsaw where again Mr. Domański will chair the ECOFIN, so EU finance ministers, where he will discuss the issue of how to finance those needs, what is the impact on the economy, but also what's the impact on innovation, because for example in the US it's not by coincidence that Elon Musk has used defense funds to boost his private business. So there is a big spillover effect when it comes to economy innovation.
Thank you so much. Paweł Karpownik, Deputy Finance Minister, thank you for joining me here in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
And so this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned on TVP World. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and features.